All right, buckle up, because today we're going deep, diving headfirst into Genesis 4.1 to 6.8. It's where things get, well, real. We're talking about the fallout from Adam and Eve's choice in the garden.
It's like those chapters are a masterclass in consequences. What happens when we stray from, let's call it, divine wisdom. And the thing is, these choices, they're not just ancient history. They echo through every generation, even our own.
Seriously, you can't escape them.
Yeah.
Okay, so quick recap for anyone who needs it. Adam and Eve, perfect paradise, right? One rule, hands off the tree of knowledge.
Okay.
But that serpent always whispering, hey, wouldn't you rather be like God?
No.
Making your own rules, deciding for yourselves good and evil, all that.
And that's the irony. Genesis makes it clear they were already made in God's image. They were already like him. But that sin, it's like they took a mirror to that image and, well, it got distorted, created this separation with huge consequences. And we see those consequences play out right away.
Oh, yeah. Exile, pain, toil. It's like the ultimate Monday morning, but every day. But then, here's where it gets even more interesting. They have kids, Cain and Abel. And get this, Cain becomes a farmer, tied to that same ground, cursed because of his parents' choice. And Abel, a shepherd, which even back then, had that connotation of closeness to God.
It's like they embody those two paths laid out before humanity, the pull towards the world and then that yearning for the divine, physical life versus spiritual life, human wisdom versus, well, you get the idea, fear of God versus fear of, well, everything else.
Constant tension, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. They both still bring offerings to God. Like, even after everything, that desire for connection, it's still there. Cain brings his produce right from that cursed ground. And Abel, he offers the firstborn of his flock, even the fat, which feels important.
It's huge because knowing in the Bible, it's not just head knowledge.
Right.
It's deeper than that. It's about intimacy, covenant. Even think about Eve when she says, I have acquired a man with the help of Yahweh. Is it acknowledging God's role? Or is there a bit of, look what I did?
Ooh, trying to control the narrative, even back then.
It's that human desire to manage things, to force God's hand even. We see it later with Sarah and Hagar, but let's stick with Cain and Abel for now. The text never explicitly says why Cain's offering was rejected. It's like, what was the deal?
Right. Was it the quality? Was he just phoning it in, lacking that genuine, heart connection that Abel had?
Well, some scholars think Abel's offering, specifically mentioning the fat, points toward a sin offering, foreshadowing Christ's sacrifice, that whole idea, and the Septuagint. It even suggests that Cain prepared his offering wrong, but the core issue, Hebrews 11.4, lays it out. Abel's offering came from faith. So the question becomes, did Cain truly believe? Or was he, like you said, just going through the motions? And that lack of genuine faith, tragically, it spilled over into the rest of his life.
Because then we get jealousy, rage, and, well, Cain commits the ultimate act of violence against his own brother.
Yeah.
And this isn't just sibling rivalry. It sets this pattern of broken brotherhood that plays out throughout the entire Bible.
Yeah, and this whole idea of brotherhood, of loving your neighbor as yourself, it's not some Old Testament relic. This is at the core of Jesus's message, the antidote to that Cain and Abel dynamic playing out over and over again.
It's like that ripple effect of sin,
Yeah.
One bad choice leading to another. But you know what always gets me? God's question to both Eve and Cain, what have you done? It's not that he needs a status update. It's that call to own up, to confess.
Totally. It's about taking responsibility. And both times, there's a consequence. Just like Adam and Eve, Cain faces exile. But his punishment, super interesting, it's directly tied to his sin. The ground, cursed even fader, refuses to yield for him.
And yet, even in judgment, God shows mercy, putting a mark on Cain to protect him. Although there's debate about whether it was a sign of true repentance or just preventing immediate bloodshed, giving Cain space to really deal with what he'd done.
It's one of those details open to interpretation. Some scholars even think the mark refers to the city Cain built, a place of refuge. But either way, you see that even in judgment, God's grace is still there.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Cain, this guy tied to the land, becomes the first city builder. It's like he's defying the very punishment given to him. And then there's Lamech, his descendant, first polygamist on record. Talk about a downward spiral.
Okay, but don't gloss over the genealogies. They might seem like just lists of names, but they're tracing God's faithfulness to his promises, pointing toward the Messiah the whole time. And they highlight the consequences of choices. Check out Lamech's poem. Some see it as glorifying violence, but it could be the very beginnings of, get this, a justice system.
Okay, now that's a new one. A justice system. Tell me more.
think about it. An eye for an eye, yeah, it sounds harsh to us now. But in that context, it was actually meant to limit violence, not escalate it. And Limerick witnesses his wives, which ties into this emphasis on truth, on accountability that we see throughout the Bible.
Mind officially blown. Okay, so we got murder, exile, cities popping up left and right. A lot to unpack. But then along comes Seth, and he's born as a replacement for Abel, not Cain. It's subtle, but it's an important distinction.
Absolutely. And Eve's response to Seth's birth, night and day compared to Cain's. This time, it's all about God's grace. Seth carries that line of the promised seed, the one who will ultimately defeat the serpent, and he's the first one recorded to call upon the name of Yahweh. It suggests a more formal worship outside the garden.
A glimmer of hope in what feels like a world getting darker by the minute. But then you get to Seth's genealogy, and it's this constant reminder, born, lived, died. But through it all, that spark of life, God's blessing, it continues. And then boom, Enoch walked with God and was taken up without dying. Talk about life goals.
Right, walked with God. It implies that deep intimacy that Adam and Eve had before the fall. And, Noah, who we'll get to in a bit, he also walked with God. And neither of their deaths are mentioned in the genealogies, which is fascinating.
Like they somehow transcended the curse, left this incredible legacy behind. And speaking of legacies, there's Methuselah, the guy who lived longer than anyone, died the year of the flood.
Imagine the stories he could tell. A living, breathing connection to that pre-flood world. And then we have Noah, and his name itself means comfort, rest. He's born into this world spiraling into chaos, but his very name hints at the hope he represents.
And that hope is definitely needed because things are about to get, well, interesting. We're talking sons of God, daughters of men, the Nephilim appearing, and that 120-year countdown.
Okay.
So we're talking sons of God, daughters of men. This feels like, straight out of mythology, like some epic clash of the titans.
It's definitely one of those things that gets your imagination going. And that's where the debate really heats up. What does it actually mean? One interpretation, and it's a popular one, is that these sons of God were fallen angels. Like they're meddling with humanity, creating this race of powerful beings, the Nephilim.
Yeah. Like biblical superhero origin story.
Exactly. But, and this is a big but, Jesus himself actually addresses this whole angel marriage thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Matthew 22.3, he says angels, they don't get married.
So not a match made in heaven then. Okay, so if it's not fallen angels, then what are we talking about here? Who are these sons of God?
Well, another interpretation suggests that they were descendants of Seth. Remember him, walking with God, that whole line.
Right.
So it's this idea of, godly men being seduced by the world, represented by the daughters of men.
Okay. The classic tale of forbidden love. Got it. But honestly, it doesn't quite have the same, epic scope as the fallen angel theory.
It doesn't. And there's a third interpretation that I actually find really compelling. It suggests that these sons of God were actually powerful rulers, kings, who might have even claimed some kind of divine right.
Oh, like those Egyptian pharaohs who believed they were descended from the gods.
Bingo. And we know, both from history and from the Bible itself, that powerful men often took what they wanted. It's that same pattern of, I see it, I want it, it's mine. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden.
It's true. And the text keeps using that phrase, they saw, they took. Like it's this echo of that first sin,
It's intentional. And the Hebrew word used here for God, Elohim, it can refer to the one true God, but it can also refer to pagan gods. It's almost as if the text is intentionally blurring the lines here,
Right.
Showing us just how far humanity has strayed.
So it's not just about breaking a rule. It's about corrupting this line, this lineage that's supposed to lead to the Messiah. We're talking high stakes here.
Absolutely. And all of this sets the stage for a really pivotal moment. God looks at the world, and Genesis 6.5 says he was grieved by what he saw. Violence, wickedness, hearts far from him.
Grieved is such a powerful word. It's not a word we use lightly. But doesn't God, he doesn't make mistakes, right? I mean, he knew what he was doing when he created us, right?
You're right. He doesn't wake up one day and think, oops. But it's not that God regrets creating us. God is love, and love doesn't change. What changes is how we respond to that love. So he sees the path we're on, and it grieves him.
It's a powerful reminder that our choices, they don't just affect us, they impact God himself.
Precisely. And this brings us to that line in Genesis 6.3 that's a bit of a head-scratcher. God says, my spirit cannot be indefinitely responsible for human beings who are only flesh. Let the time allowed each be 120 years.
Okay, time to break out the decoder ring. What does that even mean? Is God saying, everybody's time is up, 120 years, and that's a wrap?
Well, some scholars interpret it as a general shortening of human lifespans. Remember, people were living for centuries back then.
Right.
But others see it as a period of grace, like a 120-year countdown for humanity to get their act together before judgment falls.
Like a cosmic alarm clock going off.
Exactly. It's like God saying, hey, this isn't working. You've got 120 years to turn things around. The question is, did they listen?
So 120 years, right. Tick tock, tick tock. Did anybody hit the snooze button?
Well, you read about those Nephilim, those heroes of old, men of renown. Doesn't exactly scream peaceful coexistence, does it?
No, not really. It's kind of like men of renown, more like men you wouldn't want to run into in a dark alley.
Exactly. And the text connects them directly to this escalation of wickedness, violence, corruption. It's like a wildfire spreading across the earth. And it grieved God seeing his creation go down this path.
It's a heavy thought, isn't it? That God, who loves us, could be grieved by what we're doing. But then in the middle of all this darkness, we have Noah, walking with God, finding favor. It's like a ray of light breaking through the clouds.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even when things seem hopeless, God always preserves a remnant, a glimmer of hope. And Noah embodies that hope. His name itself, comfort, rest, a new beginning.
And it's not just that God chooses to start over. It's that even in bringing judgment, he's still extending grace.
Yeah.
That 120-year warning, sparing Noah and his family. It's like he's holding back the storm, hoping people will turn back to him.
That's the thing about God's judgment, though, isn't it? It's never out of anger or spite. It always comes back to love. His desire for us to choose life, to choose him. Those 120 years, that's mercy. Time to change course, to turn away from wickedness.
It really makes you think, about our own times.
Yeah.
Are we living in a similar period of grace? I mean, are we paying attention to the choices we're making as individuals, as a society? Are we hearing the alarm clock going off?
It's a question we all have to wrestle with. Because the story of the flood, it's not just ancient history. It's a reminder that our choices have consequences, that God's patience, while amazing, it's not infinite. But even in that, there's still hope. Hope that even in the darkest times, God is searching, looking for those glimmers of light, those who are willing to walk with him.
Wow. Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm going to need some time to process all of this. Maybe go find a rainbow or two.
Me too. Until next time, may you find that same comfort, that same rest, and the grace to walk in step with the divine.